So thank you so much for that, Chris. So just moving ahead uh, into your career, you mentioned that you went to work for DE Shaw, right? And very interestingly, and this is going to be a very selfish question, because
No problem.
yeah, because so I'm currently working as a product manager, and based on my research, way back in the 90s, 95 ish time period, if I'm not mistaken, you too were a product manager at DE Shaw. Like you said, you went on to work to build their internet business, etc. So, could you talk a little bit about what it was like to be a product manager back then, and B, what prompted you to leave DE Shaw and go to Harvard Business School?
Yes. So, I think that the job of being a product manager doesn't change that much, although I would say that over the intervening years, product manager has become so much more prestigious. I wish that I were a product manager in this day and age, as opposed to back then when people weren't as certain about what it was. But really, especially in a technology business, the role of the product manager is to bridge the gap between the business side and the engineering side. And, these are two worlds which often don't speak the same language. And I, having an engineering background and having worked in the trenches, in the machine shops, coding and doing all these various things, could understand much of the perspective of the software developers and engineers. And then at the same time, having come from this background, now this was prior to business school, but a background of communication, of talking, of being able to write essays and things like that, then I also had a much better understanding on the business side. And even on the business side, there's a quantitative side involving spreadsheets and the like. And because I was very good at math, I could manage that as well. And so what I was doing at D. Shaw was acting as a translator and as a way of bridging the gap between the two. And this came out in several ways. So, for example, one thing I always remember was this. We were building an online brokerage application, an online brokerage app that people would actually use to invest and everything like that. It was pioneering and all that. But we had a problem. And the problem was that the application process was a 17-step process. People had to go through 17 steps filling in information. And it was an accurate, faithful rendition of the actual paper application, which was really, really long. And I said, this will not do. I mean, what on earth is going to get people to persist through 17 pages of this stuff? And I mentioned it to the VP of engineering, who I had a good relationship with. He said, well, Chris, this is what it is. I mean, take a look. We've done our best, and we have the paper application. We've translated it. This is what it ends up being. And I said, okay, all right. But so I didn't argue with him then. What I did instead is I went away and I created a giant flow chart of the entire application and examined it. And then I said, I believe that it could be reduced to these 4 pages because I mapped out the dependencies and let me show you. So I showed him the big diagram of the existing application. Then I showed him a diagram of what I believed would be a new application that would be much more streamlined. And he said, no. And then he began looking at it and looked at it carefully. And we looked at it together for about half an hour. And he said, you're right. Wow. And then what he did was he assigned one of my friends, who is one of his top engineers, to looking at it. And this guy, being somebody who had a EECS degree from UC Berkeley, was obviously a much better software developer and engineer than I was. And he figured out how to reduce it to 3 and implemented it. But that is a great example of saying, well, I'm going to take a different approach. I'm going to look at this in a different way. I'm going to look at it from the perspective, again, first and foremost, of the consumer and the user, and saying, oh my God, I don't want to go through 17 pages worth of this stuff. But then also, the key was not just saying, hey, 17 pages is too much. You guys got to figure out a way around it. It was also being willing to roll up my hands and at least demonstrate, hey, there is an approach that will work here. I may not be the best person to do it, but I'm going to do this to demonstrate that it can be done. And then the people who are really good at this will figure out a way to actually make it happen. And so you can think of that piece of paper that I created as a prototype, right? If we think about design thinking and rapid prototyping, I created a rapid prototype, and that was able to convince the VP of engineering to actually devote resources to doing something. And being a product manager is a challenge because you do not have complete authority over everyone. What you are trying to do is you are trying to persuade the various factions, the various entities, the engineering team, the marketing team, the sales team, and all these other folks to get on board with your vision. And so your ability to be a storyteller, to persuade, to convince, to get them to buy into your vision is critical to success. And that's why I think it's great training for eventually becoming a senior manager or even a CEO. I mean, historically, that's who becomes CEO in technology companies, the product managers. And that was one of the reasons why I went down that path, because I could foresee the rest of my career. And I said, this is the thing that is going to be my competitive advantage. And this is what's going to allow me to eventually be a CEO and lead a company.